I once believed work was where you built something meaningful, where loyalty and dedication mattered. That belief shattered on a cold morning when the mentor I trusted most turned his back, fired me in front of the entire board, and destroyed everything I'd worked for. I thought every door had slammed shut, but life had other plans. It led me down a path where I would hold the power, and when I saw him again, everything had reversed. He was sitting across from me, waiting for my decision on his future. My name is Emily Carter, and at 32, I thought I had figured out the corporate game. I'd spent 5 years climbing the ladder at Brightwave Solutions, a fintech company nestled in the gleaming towers of downtown Denver. The office occupied 3 floors of a glass building that caught the morning sun and threw it back at the Rocky Mountains in the distance. Everything about the place screamed success. From the open-concept workspace with its standing desks and ergonomic chairs, to the meditation rooms and kombucha on tap in the break areas. I was good at what I did. Really good. As a senior project manager in the Digital Innovation Division, I'd led 3 major product launches that had each brought in over $10 million in revenue. My team respected me. The C-suite knew my name. But more importantly, I had Michael Grant in my corner, or so I believed. Michael was everything you'd want in a boss. Silver-haired at 50, with the kind of confident presence that commanded rooms without raising his voice. He wore tailored suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent. And he had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room when he spoke to you. During my first week at Brightwave, he'd pulled me aside after a presentation and said, "Emily, you've got something special. Stick with me, and I'll make sure you get where you deserve to be." And I believed him. God, how I believed him. Every morning, I'd arrive at 7:30, sharp, an hour before most of the team. The office would be quiet except for the hum of servers and the occasional early bird engineer grabbing coffee. I'd review metrics, prep for meetings, respond to the endless stream of Slack messages that had accumulated overnight from our Singapore office. The work was demanding. 60-hour weeks were standard, 70 during product launches. But I thrived on it. The adrenaline of closing deals, the satisfaction of seeing a project move from concept to market, the promise of that next promotion always dangling just within reach. Michael would often stop by my desk in those early morning hours. "How's my star player?" he'd ask, setting down a latte from the expensive coffee shop across the street. He always remembered I liked oat milk, no sugar. We'd discuss strategy, dissect competitor moves, plan our next quarter's objectives. He'd share stories from his MBA days at Wharton, drop hints about executive positions opening up soon. Tell me I reminded him of himself at my age, hungry, sharp, unstoppable. The culture at Brightwave was quintessentially modern American corporate. We had unlimited PTO that no one actually took, mental health days that were secretly frowned upon, and diversity initiatives that looked great in recruiting materials, but didn't change the fact that the leadership team was still 90% white men over 40. But I played the game. I wore the right clothes, blazers from Nordstrom, heels that killed my feet but made me tall enough to look men in the eye during presentations. I laughed at the right jokes, went to the right happy hours, donated to the right company-sponsored charities. My apartment in Capitol Hill reflected my success. A 1-bedroom with exposed brick and modern appliances. $1,500 a month that I could finally afford without wincing. I'd furnished it carefully, each piece a small victory. The West Elm couch I'd saved 3 months for, the kitchen island where I'd prep meals on Sundays, planning my week with military precision, the home office setup where I'd log in at night, making sure I was always one step ahead, always proving I deserved to be there. I thought I was building something, a career, a future. Maybe even a legacy at Brightwave. The company was growing, talking about IPO possibilities, expansion into European markets. And Michael kept assuring me I was part of the inner circle, part of the future leadership. "When we go public," he'd say with that confident smile, "you'll be running your own division. I guarantee it." Looking back now, I can see the signs I missed. The way Michael would take credit for my ideas in board meetings, always saying "we" when presenting my work, but somehow the we became I when the CEO praised the innovation. The way he'd promised to recommend me for promotions but then cite timing issues when they went to his golf buddies instead. The way he'd gather information from me about other team members, their weaknesses, their mistakes, always under the guise of helping me understand corporate dynamics. But I was blind to it all. I saw what I wanted to see: a mentor, a champion, a path forward in the brutal world of American corporate life. I believed that hard work and loyalty would be rewarded, that the system was tough but fair, that someone like Michael would protect someone like me. I was about to learn exactly how wrong I was. The morning it happened started like any other. April 15th, a Tuesday. I remember because I'd just filed my taxes the night before, grimacing at how much of my salary went to federal and state. I'd arrived early as usual, prepared for the quarterly review meeting where Michael had promised to announce my promotion to Director of Digital Strategy. I'd even worn my best suit, the charcoal gray theory blazer and pants that had cost me a full paycheck but made me feel invincible. Michael had been building up to this for months. "Emily, you're ready for the next level," he'd said just the week before, clapping me on the shoulder in that paternal way of his. "The board loves your work on the Morrison financial integration. This is your moment." The boardroom was packed. All 12 members of the executive committee were there, plus several senior managers. I'd prepared a presentation showcasing our division's 30% growth, the successful launches I'd spearheaded, the client retention rates that had hit an all-time high under my leadership. My hands were steady as I clicked through the slides, my voice confident as I outlined our strategic vision for the next fiscal year. Then Michael stood up. "Thank you, Emily, for that adequate presentation," he began, and something in his tone made my stomach drop. "However, after careful consideration, I've come to the difficult conclusion that Emily Carter lacks the leadership capabilities necessary for senior management." The room went silent. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest, all the air leaving my lungs at once. "What?" The word came out as barely a whisper. Michael continued, not meeting my eyes. "The Morrison integration revealed significant gaps in project management. Deadlines were missed, budgets exceeded, and frankly, the client has expressed concerns about Emily's ability to handle complex negotiations." Every word was a lie. The Morrison integration had come in 2 weeks early and under budget. The client had sent a glowing recommendation letter just 3 days ago, a letter I'd CC'd to Michael. "Furthermore," Michael said, now looking directly at me with cold, calculating eyes I'd never seen before, "there have been concerns raised about Emily's collaborative abilities. Several team members have reported feeling undermined and micromanaged." My face burned. These were complaints Michael had fabricated or twisted. Just last month, my team had nominated me for the Leadership Excellence Award, but I could see the board members exchanging glances, some nodding slowly, taking Michael at his word. After all, he was the senior vice president. He'd been with Brightwave for 15 years. Who was I against that? "I'm afraid we'll need to terminate Emily's position, effective immediately," Michael concluded. "Security will escort you to clear your desk." The humiliation was complete. 2 security guards, guys I chatted with every morning for 5 years, stood awkwardly by the door. I gathered my laptop and phone with shaking hands, placed them on the table, as required, and walked out of that boardroom with my head high even as I felt myself crumbling inside. The walk to my desk felt endless. The open office meant everyone could see. Conversations stopped. The clicking of keyboards ceased. Everyone watched as I placed my personal items, a succulent, a framed photo of my family, my coffee mug that said "Boss Lady," into a cardboard box. Someone had already disabled my key card. I had to be buzzed through each door like a visitor, or an intruder. Michael didn't even have the decency to say goodbye. Through the glass walls of his office, I could see him already in another meeting, laughing with the CEO as if he hadn't just destroyed my career with surgical precision. It wasn't until I was in my car in the parking garage, that cardboard box sitting in the passenger seat like a coffin for my ambitions, that I finally broke down. 5 years of 60-hour weeks. 5 years of sacrificing weekends, relationships, my health. 5 years of believing that loyalty and excellence would be rewarded. All destroyed in a 10-minute boardroom assassination. I drove home in a daze, my phone already buzzing with messages from former colleagues. I can't believe what happened. Michael is such a snake. You didn't deserve this. But there were fewer messages than I'd expected. People were already distancing themselves, afraid that association with me might taint their own careers. That night, I sat on my expensive couch in my expensive apartment that I could no longer afford, trying to understand why. Why had Michael done this? What had I missed? Then Sarah Martinez called. Sarah had left Brightwave 6 months earlier, and her words chilled me. Emily. He did the same thing to me, and to Jennifer before me, and to Patricia 2 years ago. It's his pattern. He builds up strong women who might threaten his position, learns everything from them, then destroys them publicly when they get too close to his level. I tried to warn you, but you were so sure he was different with you. I hadn't been special. I'd been a useful tool, then a potential threat to be eliminated. Michael had taken my ideas, my connections, my work. And when I'd grown strong enough to possibly challenge him or move beyond his control, he'd executed a calculated betrayal designed to not just fire me, but to destroy my reputation in the industry. The trust I'd placed in him, in the system, in the belief that merit and hard work mattered, it all lay shattered around me like glass. But in that wreckage, something else was born. A cold, clear understanding of how the game really worked. And a promise to myself, I would never be anyone's victim again. The first week after being fired, I couldn't get out of bed. The shame was suffocating. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that boardroom, those faces, the security guards waiting by the door. My savings would cover 3 months of expenses if I was careful. After that, the $1,500 rent, student loans, car payment, it would all come crashing down. By week 2, the denial turned to anger, then to panic. I started applying for jobs with a vengeance, 20 applications a day. Tailored cover letters, updated LinkedIn profile carefully worded to avoid the truth. But Denver's fintech scene was smaller than I'd realized. Word traveled fast. 3 interviews ended abruptly when they discovered concerns about my previous role. Michael's poison had spread throughout the industry. By month 2, I'd sold my West Elm couch, my carefully curated office setup. Anything valuable I could part with? The apartment I'd been so proud of became a prison I couldn't afford. When the eviction notice came, I sat on the floor of my empty living room and called the only person I had left, Rachel Owens, my college roommate who'd stayed loyal despite my years of canceled plans and work excuses. You're moving in with me, no arguments, Rachel said. She lived in a cramped 2-bedroom in Aurora, 40 minutes from downtown, but she cleared out her home office without hesitation. I slept on an air mattress and lived out of suitcases, my professional wardrobe mocking me from plastic storage bins. The job search became my full-time occupation. I haunted coffee shops with free Wi-Fi, nursing single cups of coffee for hours while sending out resumes. The Starbucks on Colfax became my office. I knew every barista's name, every regular's order. I'd arrive at 7 a.m. when they opened, claim a corner table, and work until they started giving me looks around 6 p.m. One particularly brutal day in July, after my 43rd rejection email, I was sitting in that familiar corner when an older woman at the next table leaned over. Excuse me, I couldn't help but overhear your phone interview earlier. You're looking for work in fintech. Her name was Diana Rodriguez, and she was a venture capitalist. Over the next hour, she listened to my story, the real one, not the sanitized version I'd been telling recruiters. She nodded knowingly when I mentioned Michael's name. I've heard similar stories about him, she said. Listen, there's a startup I'm advising, Silverline Analytics. They're small, hungry, and they need someone who understands enterprise financial systems. More importantly, they need someone with something to prove. Interested? Silverline operated out of a converted warehouse in Rhino, the trendy River North Art District. No gleaming towers, no meditation rooms, Just exposed ductwork, concrete floors, and 30 people working like their lives depended on it because they did. The CEO, Marcus Thompson, was a Black entrepreneur who'd been rejected by every major VC firm before Diana backed him. He understood what it meant to be underestimated and discarded. "I don't care about your past," Marcus said during our interview, which happened at a taco truck because the conference room was being used for coding. "I care about what you can do now. Can you help us land enterprise clients? Can you build processes that scale? Can you work harder than you've ever worked for less money than you're worth? With the promise that if we succeed, you'll be part of something real." The salary was half what I'd made at Brightwave. No benefits for the first 6 months. Stock options that might be worth nothing. I accepted immediately. Those early days at Silverline were brutal in a different way than Brightwave had been. 16-hour days fueled by cheap energy drinks and determination. We worked weekends, holidays, whenever a client needed something. But there was no pretense, no political games. Everyone was too busy surviving to backstab each other. I threw myself into the work with a fury that surprised even me. Every rejection from Brightwave's world became fuel. Every small victory at Silverline was proof that Michael had been wrong. I built our client onboarding process from scratch. I landed our first enterprise contract with a regional bank. I recruited 2 developers from my old network who'd also been burned by corporate politics. Rachel watched my transformation with concern. "Emily, you're different," she said one night when I came home at 2 a.m. again. "Harder. Are you okay?" "I'm better than okay," I told her, and I meant it. The naive trust was gone, replaced by something sharper and more useful. I wasn't trying to be anyone's star player anymore. I was building my own game. 6 months in, Silverline closed Series A funding, $12 million. Marcus promoted me to head of strategic partnerships. A year in, we landed 3 Fortune 500 clients. And I was running a team of 15. My name started appearing in industry publications, not as Michael's protege, but as a force in my own right. I moved out of Rachel's place into my own apartment, smaller than my old one, in a less trendy neighborhood, but paid for with money I'd earned without anyone's patronage. Every morning, I'd look in the mirror and see someone I barely recognized. The eager-to-please Emily was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that in American corporate life, power wasn't given, it was taken. And I was just getting started with the taking. Year 2 at Silverline changed everything. We weren't just surviving anymore, we were hunting. Marcus had a vision to disrupt the traditional financial analytics space, and my job was to make enterprise clients believe in that vision. I'd learned to weaponize everything Michael had inadvertently taught me about corporate psychology. Except now I used it to build, rather than to please. The startup world was a different beast than Brightwave's corporate machine. No one cared where you'd gotten your MBA or who you golfed with on weekends. They cared about results. Period. Can you close the deal? Can you ship the product? Can you make the numbers work? It was brutally meritocratic in a way that was both exhausting and exhilarating. I built my team carefully, recruiting people who'd been overlooked or underestimated by traditional corporations. Maria, a brilliant data scientist who'd been passed over for promotions because of her accent. James, a developer who'd been labeled not leadership material because he was autistic, despite being the best systems architect I'd ever met. Priya, who'd been mommy-tracked at her last 3 companies despite having a Stanford MBA. We called ourselves the island of misfit toys, and we were hungry in a way that comfortable corporate teams could never be. The 18-hour days became our normal. We'd order Thai food at midnight, debug code until 3 a.m., then be back at 8 a.m. for client calls with the East Coast. My apartment became a second office. I'd fall asleep with my laptop on my chest, wake up to Slack notifications, and immediately start working again. There was no work-life balance. There was only the work, the mission, the next milestone that would keep us alive. But unlike at Brightwave, every sacrifice had a direct purpose. When we landed Microsoft as a client, it was because I'd spent 3 months cultivating relationships, Flying to Seattle on red-eyes, I paid for myself because we couldn't afford proper business travel yet. When our platform processed its first billion-dollar transaction, we all cried in the conference room, which was really just a corner of the warehouse with a whiteboard. Marcus made me Chief Strategy Officer after we closed Series B, $35 million this time. The title came with real equity, not just promises. I was 34 years old and finally had actual power. Not the borrowed kind that depended on someone else's approval. We moved to a real office in downtown Denver. Ironically, just 3 blocks from Brightwave's building. Sometimes I'd see my former colleagues at lunch spots, and they'd do that awkward dance of recognition, pretend not to see me, or offer overly enthusiastic greetings that fooled no one. The ones who'd messaged support after my firing but then gone silent were the worst. Their guilt was palpable. I learned to be a different kind of leader than Michael had been. Transparent when I could be, protective when I needed to be. I fought for my team's raises before my own. I gave them credit in board meetings, made sure their names were on their innovations. But I also learned to be ruthless when necessary. I fired people who couldn't perform, killed projects that weren't working, made decisions that hurt feelings but saved the company. The difference was, I did it honestly, without the manipulation and betrayal. The venture capital world started noticing us. We were invited to present at TechCrunch Disrupt, featured in Forbes's FinTech Startups to Watch. Diana, our original investor, joined our board and became my unofficial mentor, teaching me how to navigate the boys' club of venture capital without losing myself or compromising my values. Never forget, she told me over whiskey one night after a brutal board meeting. They expect us to fail. Every success is a surprise to them. Use that underestimation as a weapon. By year 3, Silverline had 150 employees and a valuation of $200 million. We were competing directly with established players, including Brightwave Solutions. In pitch meetings, I'd occasionally hear Michael's name. "Oh, you were at Brightwave? Did you work with Michael Grant? Brilliant strategist." I'd smile and give a neutral response, filing away information for a future I couldn't quite envision yet. I moved to a better apartment in Lodo, bought a car that didn't break down every winter, started rebuilding the savings that had been decimated. But more than the material recovery, I was building something else, a reputation, a network, a power base that didn't depend on anyone's patronage. My team grew to 40 people across 3 divisions. We poached talent from Google, Goldman Sachs, and yes, from Brightwave. Every hire from my old company brought intelligence about their struggles, their outdated systems, their vulnerability to disruption. I listened to it all, stored it away, not sure what I was preparing for, but knowing I was preparing for something. The girl who'd been escorted out by security was gone. In her place stood someone who understood how the game really worked, not the version they taught in business school, but the real one. Where power came from value you created that couldn't be stolen or claimed by someone else. Where loyalty was earned, not to individuals, but to missions and teams. Where trust was given carefully and strategically, never blindly. Late at night, when I'd finally close my laptop and look out at the Denver skyline, I'd sometimes think about Michael, not with the raw pain of betrayal anymore, but with a cold curiosity. He'd created his own worst nightmare, someone who knew his playbook, understood his weaknesses, and had nothing left to lose. He just didn't know it yet. The email arrived on a Thursday morning in November, marked confidential, board eyes only. Marcus forwarded it to me with just 3 words. "Holy shit, Emily." Brightwave Solutions was in trouble. Their stock had dropped 40% in 6 months. 3 major clients had defected to competitors, including us. Their board was looking for a buyer before things got worse, and they'd quietly reached out to Silverline about a potential acquisition of their digital innovation division, the very department Michael ran. I read the email 3 times, my coffee growing cold in my hand. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of irony. "We can't afford to buy them outright," Marcus said in our emergency strategy session, "but we could do a partial acquisition, take their best assets, absorb their client base, leave the dead weight." "Who would manage the integration?" Diana asked, though her eyes were already on me. Emily knows their systems better than anyone, Marcus said. And frankly, their team would respect her. Half of them have already tried to jump ship to us anyway. The negotiations took 3 months. I insisted on being part of every meeting, every due diligence session, every structural discussion. I learned that Brightwave's decline had accelerated after I left, not because I was irreplaceable, but because Michael's pattern of destroying talent had finally caught up with him. The good people left or were pushed out. The innovation stopped. The clients noticed. During one particularly tense negotiation session at Brightwave's offices, I saw Michael for the first time in 3 years. He was presenting their division's assets, trying to inflate the value. His silver hair had more gray, his confident posture slightly stooped. When he saw me sitting across the table, taking notes on his presentation, his face went pale. "Emily," he said after the meeting, catching me by the elevator. "I heard you were doing well at Silverline." "We're doing very well," I corrected him, my voice professionally neutral. "Your client retention numbers seem to have declined, 20% year over year." He flinched. "The market has been challenging." "Has it? Our revenue grew 60% in the same period." The elevator arrived, and I stepped in without looking back. But I could feel his eyes on me, could sense the calculation happening behind them. He knew what this acquisition meant. His division would be absorbed, restructured. His fate would be decided by new leadership. The final deal was signed in February. Silverline would acquire Brightwave's digital innovation division for $35 million, a fraction of what it had been worth when I worked there. We'd take their clients, their technology, their top performers, and as part of the restructuring, I would oversee the integration as executive vice president of the combined entity. The org chart was drawn up by our leadership team, but the placement of Michael Grant was left to me. He has institutional knowledge, our board advised, but he's also been part of the problem. Your call, Emily. I spent a week thinking about it. The vindictive part of me wanted to fire him immediately. The same public humiliation he'd inflicted on me. But that would be too quick, too merciful. And it wouldn't be smart business. He did have relationships we could use, at least temporarily. Instead, I did something worse. I kept him on as a senior manager, not even a director, reporting directly to me. The man who'd once decided my fate would now submit weekly reports to me, attend meetings I scheduled, execute strategies I designed. Every performance review, every project assignment, every career-defining decision would go through me. The announcement went out on a Monday. "We're excited to welcome the Brightwave team to the Silverline family. The following leadership structure will ensure a smooth integration." Michael's name appeared halfway down the list, under my directors, at the same level as people who'd been his juniors. He had 2 choices: accept the demotion and work for the woman he'd betrayed, or leave and try to find another executive position at 55 in an industry that had already heard whispers about his decline. His mortgage, his kids' college tuitions, his lifestyle, they all depended on that Silverline paycheck now. The day the integration officially began, I held an all-hands meeting in our Denver office. The Brightwave team filed in, uncomfortable in the casual startup environment. Michael sat in the middle, trying to be invisible. I stood at the front, wearing jeans and a blazer instead of the formal suits he'd once required, and laid out our vision for the future. "We believe in transparency here," I said, making eye contact with each former Brightwave employee. "We believe in merit-based advancement. We believe in learning from failures rather than burying them. And we believe that the best ideas can come from anywhere, not just the executive suite." Everything I said was a repudiation of Michael's leadership style, and everyone in that room knew it. Some of the Brightwave folks actually smiled. They'd been waiting years for this changing of the guard. After the meeting, Michael approached my office. I let him wait outside for 10 minutes while I finished a call, watching him through the glass walls as he shifted uncomfortably, the same way I'd once waited for him. "Come in," I finally said. He entered my office, larger than his had ever been, with a view of the mountains he'd always coveted. "Emily, I think we should discuss. Your first assignment is due Friday." I interrupted, sliding a folder across the desk. You'll be analyzing why we lost the Morrison financial account and developing a recovery strategy. I expect comprehensive documentation and a presentation to the board. Morrison Financial, the client he'd used as an excuse to destroy me. His face flushed, but he took the folder. Of course, he said quietly. As he turned to leave, I added, Michael, this is a fresh start. I judge people solely on their current performance. I hope you'll take advantage of that opportunity. He paused at the door, understanding the weight of what I hadn't said, that his past performance, his patterns, his betrayals were all known to me, that his future was entirely in my hands now, that mercy, if it came, would be on my terms. Thank you, he said, the words clearly painful. After he left, I turned to look out at the mountains, feeling something I hadn't expected, not satisfaction exactly, but a sense of balance being restored. The universe had indeed delivered him to me, and now the real work would begin. The first month of Michael working under me was a masterclass in psychological warfare, though I never raised my voice or showed any emotion beyond professional courtesy. I implemented the exact systems he'd once used to control his subordinates, but with surgical precision. Every Monday at 7 a.m., he had to present his weekly metrics in my office, the same hour he used to require my presence. I'd scrutinize every number, question every decision, the way he'd once done to me. But unlike his arbitrary criticism, mine was devastatingly accurate. I knew where every body was buried in his projects because I'd helped bury half of them. Your conversion rates on the Peterson account are down 12%. I noted during one morning session, not looking up from my tablet. Explain. He shifted in his chair, the uncomfortable visitor's chair, while I sat behind the executive desk. The client has been resistant to our new pricing model. Interesting, because when I called Peterson yesterday, he said no one from your team had reached out in 3 weeks. I finally looked up, meeting his eyes. Would you like to revise your explanation? The color drained from his face. He hadn't known I was personally monitoring his accounts, making my own calls. The truth was, I tracked everything he did, every email through our system, every client interaction logged in our CRM, every hour billed. The same invasive oversight he'd once subjected others to, except I had the technology to do it better. I assigned him to work with James, my autistic systems architect, the kind of person Michael would have dismissed immediately in his old world. James didn't understand political games or social hierarchies. He only cared about efficient code and optimal solutions. Watching Michael have to defer to someone he would have once ignored was a quiet victory. James, oblivious to the dynamics, would cheerfully correct Michael's outdated technical knowledge in front of the entire team. Mr. Grant, that methodology was deprecated 3 years ago. James would say during stand-ups, here's the current best practice. And Michael would have to nod and take notes, his jaw tight. The real masterstroke came when I restructured the bonus system. Performance metrics were now transparent, posted weekly on our internal dashboard for everyone to see. Michael's numbers were consistently in the bottom quartile of his peer group, not because I manipulated them, but because his skills had atrophied while he'd been playing politics instead of doing actual work. His bonus that quarter was less than what our junior associates received. But I was careful never to be unfair, never to give him ammunition for a wrongful termination suit or a complaint to the board. Every criticism was documented, every expectation crystal clear. I gave him the tools to succeed. He simply couldn't use them effectively anymore. The industry had evolved while he'd been resting on his laurels and others' achievements. 3 months in, I assigned him to lead a pitch to DataForge Systems, a potential client worth $8 million annually. It was a test, and we both knew it. Success would improve his standing. Failure would justify further demotion. I gave him a strong team, adequate resources, and 3 weeks to prepare. The night before the pitch, he came to my office at 9 p.m. I was still working, as always. Emily, he began. And I saw something I'd never seen before, Michael Grant without his armor of arrogance. The presentation tomorrow. I need more time. The client meeting is set, I replied, not looking up from my screen. You've had 3 weeks. The team isn't responding to my leadership. They're not following my strategic vision. I finally looked at him. Have you considered that your strategic vision might be the problem? His face reddened. You've poisoned them against me. I've done nothing but give you a fair opportunity, I said calmly. Your team doesn't trust you because trust is earned, Michael. Not demanded, not manipulated, earned. You taught me that, remember? Just not the lesson you intended. The silence stretched between us. Outside, Denver's lights twinkled in the darkness. The same view I'd once seen from a much lower floor. The way I treated you, he said finally. The words seemingly dragged from him. It was strategic. The board wanted headcount reduction, and you were expendable, I offered. Threatening? Too competent for comfort? He didn't answer, but his silence was confirmation enough. Here's what's going to happen tomorrow. I said, you're going to give that presentation. If you win the account, you keep your job and might even earn back some respect. If you lose it, we'll have another conversation about your future here. That's more chance than you gave me. He stood to leave, then paused. You're enjoying this. No, I said honestly. What I'm enjoying is building something real, with people who deserve success. You're just here. A problem to be managed, like updating legacy software or dealing with technical debt. You made yourself into this, Michael. Every choice, every betrayal, every person you stepped on. They all led you directly to that chair in my office. The next day's pitch was a disaster. Michael's old-school presentation style, his condescending tone with the female executives from DataForge, his inability to answer technical questions without deflecting, it all fell apart in real time. I watched from the back of the room as his carefully constructed executive presence crumbled. The 28-year-old DataForge CTO actually laughed when Michael suggested their concerns about data security were overthinking things. We lost the account, but I didn't fire him, not yet. Instead, I moved him to what we called special projects, essentially internal documentation and process mapping, the kind of work given to employees being managed out. He now sat in the open floor plan, no office, no direct reports, surrounded by 20-somethings who whispered about him being the cautionary tale of what happened to executives who couldn't evolve. Every morning, he had to badge in past the security desk, where the same guards who'd escorted me out of Brightwave now worked for Silverline. I'd hired them personally. They always greeted him with excessive politeness. Good morning, Mr. Grant, have a productive day. Their knowing smiles said everything. The quarterly board meeting was scheduled for the last Friday in May. Every department head would present their division's performance to the combined Silverline Brightwave Board of Directors. Michael, despite his diminished role, was required to present the documentation project he'd been assigned, a comprehensive audit of our technical infrastructure that he'd been working on for 6 weeks. I'd reviewed his work the night before. It was mediocre at best, filled with buzzwords and lacking substantive insights. The Michael of 5 years ago would have torn apart anyone who'd submitted such shallow analysis. But I wasn't going to give him private feedback this time. He would present it as is to the board. The morning of the meeting. I arrived early to find Michael already in the boardroom, frantically revising his slides. His hands shook slightly as he clicked through them. The man who once commanded rooms with his presence now looked like a nervous junior associate. Preparation is key, I said, entering the room. You taught me that. He looked up, and for a moment, I saw pure resentment flash across his face before he controlled it. The requirements for this project kept changing. No, they didn't. You just didn't understand them the first time, or the second, or the third. I set my laptop down at the head of the table, the seat he'd once occupied. The board arrives in an hour. I hope you're ready. As the board members filed in, I watched Michael shrink further into himself. Several were his former peers, people who'd once considered him their equal. Diana Rodriguez gave him a cool nod. Marcus barely acknowledged him. The Brightwave board members who'd once backed his every decision now avoided eye contact entirely. I ran the meeting with the efficiency I'd learned from watching him, but without the theatrical power plays. Each presenter had 15 minutes, with 5 for questions. When Michael's turn came, I introduced him with clinical detachment. Michael Grant will present our infrastructure documentation audit. He stood, his usual commanding presence replaced by something almost fragile. His voice cracked on the opening slide. The laser pointer trembled in his hand as he highlighted meaningless metrics that failed to tell any coherent story. 3 minutes in, Diana interrupted. Mr. Grant, what specific vulnerabilities did you identify in our legacy systems? He fumbled through his notes. Well, there are several areas of concern. Which areas specifically? She pressed. The database architecture shows signs of age. That's incredibly vague. Marcus cut in. Emily, has anyone else reviewed this work? This is Mr. Grant's analysis, I said neutrally. He's had 6 weeks and full access to our systems. The CFO, someone who'd golfed with Michael for years, shook his head. This is undergraduate level work. Michael, where's the depth? Where's the strategic thinking you were known for? Michael's face flushed deep red. He clicked to the next slide, but it was just more of the same, surface-level observations anyone could have made. The room grew increasingly uncomfortable as his incompetence became undeniable. Perhaps we should move on, suggested one board member, second-hand embarrassment evident in his voice. No, I said quietly. Mr. Grant should finish his presentation. We all deserve that respect. The cruelty of kindness, making him continue when everyone wanted it to stop. He stumbled through 7 more minutes of empty corporate speak while the board checked their phones, whispered to each other, or stared out the windows. When he finally concluded with questions, the silence was deafening. I have one, I said. In your analysis, you recommend we maintain our current systems without major upgrades, yet our competitors are implementing next-generation solutions that will leave us behind within 18 months. How do you reconcile this? He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I believe in fiscal responsibility. You believe in avoiding difficult decisions, I corrected. The same way you avoided developing new skills, avoided promoting talented people who threatened you, avoided taking any risks that might reveal your limitations. Emily, Diana warned softly, but I continued. This is the quality of strategic thinking that led Brightwave to lose 40% of its value. This is why we acquired you for pennies on the dollar. I turned to the board. I recommend we reassign the infrastructure project to someone capable of actual analysis. The vote was unanimous. After the meeting, as board members filed out, several stopped to compliment my leadership, to note how well the integration was proceeding despite certain challenges. Michael remained seated, staring at his closed laptop. You orchestrated this, he said when we were alone. No, Michael. You orchestrated this. 5 years ago. When you decided to destroy someone who trusted you. When you chose to protect your position instead of developing talent. When you built your career on the backs of people you discarded. I gathered my materials. I just gave you the opportunity to show everyone who you really are without your stolen ideas and manipulated metrics. What do you want from me? His voice broke slightly. An apology? Fine, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I fired you. It was wrong. I don't want your apology. It means nothing. I moved toward the door, then stopped. What I wanted was for you to understand what it feels like, to be publicly humiliated, to have your work dismissed, to sit in a room full of people who once respected you and watch that respect die in real time. You've made your point. No, I haven't. Not yet. I turned back to face him. The point is that actions have consequences. You created this moment 5 years ago. Every person you betrayed, every career you sabotaged, every lie you told, they all led here, to you sitting alone in this boardroom with nothing left but the remnants of a reputation you never deserved. I left him there, in that expensive boardroom with its panoramic views of the city where he'd once been powerful. Through the glass walls, I could see him put his head in his hands. The silver-haired executive who'd once made me feel worthless was finally understanding what worthlessness actually felt like. That night, HR received his request to work remotely for health reasons. I approved it, knowing he'd never show his face in the office again. The humiliation was complete, witnessed by everyone who mattered. The myth of Michael Grant, brilliant strategist and corporate leader, had died in that boardroom. The final documentation arrived on my desk on a Tuesday morning in June. Michael Grant's resignation letter, effective immediately, along with a transition plan that was surprisingly thorough. Perhaps the best work he'd done in months. He was taking an advisory role with a small firm in Kansas City, the kind of position that meant he'd never be a real player again. The corporate equivalent of exile. I signed the acceptance paperwork without hesitation. No exit interview, no farewell gathering, no pretense of regret. He would clean out his desk after hours, when no one would see him carrying his boxes to the parking garage. The same discreet humiliation he'd once orchestrated for others. But there was one last piece of business. In his resignation, he'd requested his final paycheck be expedited due to financial obligations. I knew what that meant. The mortgage on his Cherry Hills mansion, the country club memberships, the lifestyle he could no longer afford. I processed it personally, ensuring every penny owed was calculated correctly. Not a dollar more, not a dollar less. The same precise fairness he'd never shown anyone else. That afternoon, I called a meeting with the former Brightwave employees who'd survived the integration. 43 people gathered in our main conference room, the same ones who'd watched Michael's public dismantling with a mixture of satisfaction and unease. Michael Grant no longer works for Silverline, I announced simply. His projects will be redistributed among the team based on your strengths and interests. But before we move forward, I want to address something. I looked around the room at faces that had witnessed or experienced Michael's management style firsthand. What happened with Michael was justice, not cruelty. Every consequence he faced was one he'd inflicted on others. Every humiliation was one he'd designed for someone else. I didn't destroy him. I simply refused to protect him from the reality of his own methods. I paused. But that chapter is closed now. We build forward, not backward. This company will succeed because we elevate talent, not because we tear it down. The meeting ended with something unexpected. Applause. Not triumphant, but relieved. The shadow that had hung over so many careers was finally gone. 3 weeks later, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. It was from Michael's wife, Catherine. She wanted me to know that Michael had told her everything, what he'd done to me, to others, the pattern of destruction he'd left behind. She was leaving him. She thanked me for showing her who he really was, even though that hadn't been my intention. The personal consequences of his professional choices had finally come home. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. 6 months passed. Silverline went public at a $2 billion valuation. I rang the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange, standing where Michael had always dreamed of standing. The photo made the cover of TechCrunch. Emily Carter, the executive who built success on substance, not politics. In interviews, reporters would occasionally ask about my time at Brightwave, about working under Michael Grant. I would give the same measured response. Every experience teaches you something valuable. My time there taught me the importance of authentic leadership and the danger of misplaced trust. I prefer to focus on building the future rather than revisiting the past. But late at night, in my corner office overlooking Denver, I would sometimes think about that morning 5 years ago when security escorted me out with my cardboard box of belongings. The humiliation that had felt like an ending had actually been a beginning. Michael had meant to destroy me, but instead, he'd freed me from the corporate mythology I'd believed in. That loyalty was rewarded, that hard work was enough, that the system was fair. The truth was harsher but more useful. Power respects only power. Success comes not from trusting the system, but from understanding its real rules. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't just living well, It's living well while watching your betrayer lose everything they'd built on the backs of others. I kept Michael's final performance review in my desk drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. At the bottom, in the comments section, I'd written one line. Mr. Grant's performance reflects the inevitable decline of leadership built on politics rather than competence. It was the same phrase he'd used about me 5 years ago, word for word. From the termination paperwork I'd been forced to sign, the circle was complete. The student had become the master, and the master had learned what it felt like to be dismissed, discarded, and forgotten. The last I heard, Michael was working as an independent consultant from his home office in Kansas, struggling to get clients, his LinkedIn profile desperately emphasizing his decades of experience to an industry that had already moved on without him. Meanwhile, I was building an empire, one authentic success at a time. I stood from my desk, gathered my things, and headed home to my new place, a penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the mountains. As I waited for the elevator, I caught my reflection in the polished steel doors. The woman looking back at me was someone Michael Grant would never recognize, someone who'd taken his worst lesson and transformed it into her greatest strength. The elevator arrived, and I stepped inside. As the doors closed, I allowed myself one small smile, not of cruelty or vengeance, but of satisfaction. The kind that comes from knowing that sometimes, if you wait long enough and work hard enough, the universe delivers justice with compound interest. And sometimes, you get to be the one who signs the check. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'm curious, where are you listening from right now? Please share in the comments below so we can connect with listeners from around the world. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your own thoughts about workplace justice and second chances. Have you ever experienced a complete reversal of power in your career? Let's discuss in the comments.